Viva Health. Here's some tips to help you eat well and feel great. For portion control, use a smaller plate. Fill half your plate with fruits and veggies. And drink water instead of sugary drinks. For more tips, hashtag Viva Health SA. San Antonio Metro Health, leading the way to a healthier community.
Para comer saludable y sentirse bien, use un plato pequeño para controlar porciones. Llene la mitad con frutas y verduras. Beba agua en lugar de bebidas azucaradas. Para más consejos, hashtag Viva Health SA. Metro Health, liderando el camino hacia una comunidad más saludable.
Hello everyone. Happy Friday. And thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the final day of the 5th annual San Antonio CityFest. This year's Urban Ideas Festival is available online, free and accessible for all, thanks to the support of our sponsors. We invite you to share today's conversation on Facebook and help ensure these critical conversations are reaching everyone in our community. Before we begin today's panel, we want to take a moment to acknowledge this year's sponsors and partners, with a special thank you to our 2022 presenting sponsors, the City of San Antonio and Bexar County Economic and Community Development. We also thank our engagement and innovation sponsors for supporting this year's event. For a full list of our sponsors, please visit our website, cityfestsa.org. If you find value in local reporting efforts and civic engagement like events like this one, we invite you to support our nonprofit newsroom by joining our membership program today. Check out the link in the chat on screen to donate. Okay, so today's panel on emerging changemakers grew out of one simple question: who are the future leaders of San Antonio? We cover many topics at the San Antonio Report: local government, business, development, education, social issues, utilities, arts and culture. And in many of those areas, we're seeing generational change as older leaders step back from their day-to-day influence. We chose each of today's panelists because they are emerging leaders, and we're eager to learn their perspectives on the next era of this city's growth. All right, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Representative Ina Menares. She's represented Texas House District 124 since 2015 and earned Rookie of the Year honors from Texas Monthly. Her list of legislative accomplishments is too long to note here, touching on areas of concern for all Texans, including education, foster care, the military, among many others. Early on, Representative Menares picked crops with migrant workers and interned in the office of an El Paso attorney who helped migrants and refugees file for legal residency. Sarah Carabias Rush is the Chief Economic Development Officer of Greater SATX, the regional economic partnership of the 8-county San Antonio New Braunfels metro area. Rush leads the Regional Economic Development Team in corporate recruitment, local business retention and expansion, global business development, research, and regional marketing. She has extensive experience in efforts to recruit major corporate headquarters to Texas City. And Jordan Gowie is Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Southwest Texas Regional Advisory Council, otherwise known as STRAC, our regional emergency healthcare system. Among other efforts, Gowie is a board member of the San Antonio Housing Trust and is deeply engaged in efforts to advance health equity, civic engagement, and affordable housing. Next, we have Will Garrett, Vice President of Talent and Technology Development and Integration for Port San Antonio. In addition to extensive work in economic development, he's a co-founder of BuildSec Foundry, an incubator for the development of new cybersecurity products and technology. Kimia Denise Factory is President and Executive Director of Black Freedom Factory, working to dismantle racial inequity across the state of Texas, focused on issues including police accountability, voting rights, and reproductive justice. Factory is affiliated with organizations including Planned Parenthood and Black Voters Matter. Okay, let's start with Representative Menards. Immigration is a hot button issue bringing national attention to San Antonio. Given your experience as both a changemaker and an advocate for migrants, do you have innovative ideas for moving the immigration issue forward and beyond the current contentious back and forth?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today, and it's good to see my fellow panelists this morning. You know, immigration is something that is an issue that has been very near and dear to my heart. I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, which is a border town. I recall my home is just feet away from the Rio Grande River. I was born with the fences and seeing Border Patrol agents in our neighborhood. That was a common sight, watching them, you know, bicycling through the neighborhood, and that's just what a way of life was, and the beautiful relationship that El Paso had with Juarez, Mexico, and understanding that we both needed each other in terms of the workforce, in terms of what it brought, the economic development it brought to El Paso, and vice versa. You know, a couple of frustrations that I have, you know, immigration reform, it continues to not be something that is prioritized. You know, the federal level they talk about it, but it's truly never ever been dealt with. And until there's a true effort to look at the immigration system to figure out ways in which it could be made better, how it can be improved, you know, the crisis is just going to continue. I served on the Appropriations Committee for 2 sessions of the Texas State House, and I could just tell you, and many of you know, and it's been written upon, the fact that a lot of taxpayer money has been diverted to Operation Lone Star. This last session, a record-breaking amount was allotted, and you're seeing the problems now with that operation and the fact that it continues to be used as political talking points, and it's going to continue. So I'm curious to see what happens come Election Day in just a few weeks. If leadership stays the same under Abbott and Patrick, you know, money will continue to be diverted to Operation Lone Star. We're talking about millions of taxpayer dollars that could have been going to education, that could have been going to healthcare, areas of need. But maybe we'll see a change, and hopefully we'll see a change in terms of what could be done. But until immigration reform is really handled on the federal level, I fear that it's just going to get worse.
Is there anything we can do locally or at the state level right now or in the immediate future just to advance the conversation beyond that stalemate?
First of all, you need to use your voice in terms of voting. I mean, really, if we want to see a change in any particular area of policy, voting matters, and you want to elect those elected officials that you feel are going to be bring critical change. But you know, the fact that we now have a migrant and refugee center in San Antonio, yes, we've got to continue the discussion. This is something that we can no longer ignore. The fact that you had a governor in Florida coming in and hoodwinking people into getting on a plane and sending them to, you know, Martha's Vineyard. They're coming into Bexar County and trying to score political points at the detriment of people who truly just are coming into the United States for a better life. And so we are definitely going to have to continue discussing it, what we can do to ensure that we treat these people humanely, and what we can do in terms of what are the parameters on the local level and state level that we can do in terms of trying to make progress on immigration reform on the local state level. But this is definitely an area that we definitely have to continue talking about.
You mentioned a beautiful relationship and economic development, and I think those are going to be key topics in our discussion today. So we'll get back to that. And okay, just for a moment, indulge me, all of us, viewers included, let's close our eyes and imagine the year 2050. The San Antonio, New Braunfels area is projected to have 4.5 million residents, nearly doubling the current population. So whether immigrants or citizens, all of those residents will need housing, jobs, education, healthcare, and an equitable justice system. As a board member of the Housing Trust, Jordan, Where are we going to put them all?
So that's a great question. I mean, you're talking about doubling our population in San Antonio. And the first thing is we don't have the current housing supply that's necessary, especially when we look at housing affordability. So I would say we need to do three things, which is preserve, produce, and protect our current housing stock, as well as building additional units. And that it can't just be a one-size solution. We need housing that is different shapes and sizes. I personally would love to see more urban infill. When we're looking at VIA, and VIA has this north-south line that they're trying to build, this advanced rapid transit. We got this east-west line, and that could be a real game changer for San Antonio and allow us to do some true urban infill, because infill is building where people already are, whereas sprawl is building where people aren't. So I think when we look at climate, we look at equity, building on transit lines is going to be really important. But the other part of this is we don't necessarily want to see displacement of legacy residents in San Antonio. And we're already seeing that, especially in my neighborhood. The east, west, and south side are seeing it every single day. So I'm really excited that the city has this displacement impact assessment tool that they're going to be using to utilize the bond funding. And the San Antonio Housing Trust is also looking to adopt that tool so that when we are building our projects, we also look at it from a lens of displacement and ensuring that we're not displacing these legacy residents, but at the same time allowing us to build additional affordable housing units in San Antonio.
What do you think the key is between, getting the private sector, developers, et cetera, and the public sector together in that conversation so that we have the mix of private expansion, housing developed in other areas of the city, but keep that balance that you're mentioning, that we need to also concentrate on areas people already live. How do we get those different sectors talking to each other, get them on the same page?
So I think there's a lot of current public-private partnership. The Housing Trust, the bonds. I'm very excited that we passed $150 million for the first time in San Antonio's history, affordable housing bond. So we're already working closely with developers, but developers are really listening to the market conditions. And just like you and I are suffering right now with interest rates, 7%, construction costs are up. So they're looking at the market conditions and where the demand is, as well as what the market is dictating in terms of these rates. So we do have an issue with where we're at currently and trying to build additional public-private partnerships, because when they come to the Housing Trust, or they come to the city or another PFC, they're going to come in and they're going to have these massive gap funding issues. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars to build these units. Now, I'll also say that developers are listening to public entities like the Housing Trust, like the City of San Antonio, like some of our housing advocates that are saying we need deeper affordability. Our San Antonio Strategic Housing and Implementation Plan, the SHIP, identified 95,000 cost-burdened households in San Antonio. 95,000, and that was pre the inflation numbers that we're seeing today.
Can you define that term, cost-burdened household?
So a cost-burdened household is a household that's spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And think about it from an economy perspective too. If I'm spending all that money on housing, then I'm not spending it in our local economy on other goods and services. So it actually hurts everything. And we already live in a barbell economy where we have the rich on one end, we have the poor on one end, and this very thin middle class in between it. So it just helps drive further inequity. But they are listening. They listen to the developers, come to the Housing Trust. They hear what we're saying, which is, going back to the SHIP, that there's 95,000 cost-burdened households, and that we have a deep, deep need for the 0 to 30% AMI affordability. Now, we have to listen to that. We have to try to find ways to do it, but we also can't swing that pendulum too far left, because in an increased market where the interest rates are high, construction costs are high, labor shortages, these deals won't pencil. So we have to find a way to find a good balance to address the target population that we need and still be able to make these deals work.
Great. So Sarah, I'd like to address the economic development aspect of that question as well. Where are all of those new residents and current residents going to work? And as we've talked a little bit, San Antonio has some challenges competing with the sexier cities, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth area, Houston, in terms of attracting major corporations. And given your experience attracting business throughout throughout Texas, throughout various regions, how can we make sure that everyone in our region has opportunities to succeed I'm curious how you define San Antonio's strengths as compared to those other cities and what we need to ensure a brighter economic future.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. And first of all, I'm delighted to be here with this group of leaders. They're an incredible group, and I'm already enjoying the conversation. I think there's a couple of considerations that we need to think about when we think about where San Antonio fits. We're in the state of Texas, which regardless of political affiliation, we're all here for a reason, right? And we have a lot of opportunities to recruit companies into the state because of the way that we are business friendly. And so that's that's not unique to San Antonio. That's going to be across the entire state, and that's a big opportunity for us. But I think, when we talk about issues of making sure that we're not leaving folks behind, and we talk about affordable housing issues, the number one thing that always comes to my mind is, what are we doing to help every single person within our community connect with training so that they are getting into jobs that are going to be paying them well, where they can make sure that their families can not be spending 30% or more on housing costs. And so we're focused really on trying to drive those quality jobs that are going to be bringing in wages that allow for families to focus on upskilling, training, getting into opportunities, seeing that economic mobility within the company. When it comes to your question around sexiness of Dallas or Austin or others, certainly their reputations in these places within the corporate community. And I think I would reframe the question a little bit. I think that San Antonio is one of the fastest growing markets. People clearly want to live here. I think I think we have a lot of apologists here within San Antonio that say, we're not good enough. And I beg to differ. I think that there is so much potential and opportunity within this community. I mean, personally, that was part of the reason I left, because the culture here is so authentic. The people here are warm and smart and hardworking, and I see so much opportunity. And I think we just haven't done a very good job of telling that story to the people that are making decisions about these location opportunities. And if we continue to invest in our people and in workforce training and development opportunities, we continue to invest in our place, making sure that areas that have historically been redlined and left behind are getting the kinds of investment that will move that community forward. I think we're gonna shine. We've got a lot to offer here, and companies will take notice when they get a chance to hear about it.
And we'll get back to how you're going to communicate that message in a minute. But for the moment, Will, I would like to ask a question, maybe pertaining also to Austin in terms of its success in attracting, creating a tech sector that's thriving and maybe presenting some challenges for San Antonio to catch up in that area, particularly after the pandemic kind of cleared out downtown, where our emergent tech hub was beginning to grow and thrive, and then took that a little bit of a hit. I'm curious what challenges you see moving forward with the tech sector here, and how you plan to attract and retain the talent and to create equitable opportunity throughout that industry.
It's a great question, Nicholas. I'd agree with Sarah too. I'd go back to your sexy comment. I'd put up San Antonio's sexiness against Dallas, Houston, Austin all day long, because I do think, and it goes to the question you just asked, I think a young professional today is looking to be part of something they can help build. And San Antonio is still at this. I know authenticity is thrown around a lot, and I think it's a true word describing San Antonio. But I think I meet so many entrepreneurs, young professionals, college graduates, high school graduates that come here because they can still get a meeting with Jordan, or they can go talk to Representative Mijares. They can have access to the right people with ideas that are really trying to build a community that has this long and storied history. I mean, absolutely COVID. I mean, I think especially downtown with all the momentum we had, driven by Geekdom and 80/20 Foundation, ScaleWorks, and what was building there. And I think slowly it's going to come back. It'll look a little different. I'm hugely bullish on what UTSA is doing in the downtown area with the College of Data Science and National Security Collaboration Center. But I think the colleagues on the panel would agree with me. I think San Antonio's done a really good job of focusing on what we do good and looking at our strengths. I'd put our life sciences sector up against anyone. Now it doesn't look exactly like the Texas Medical Center and what Houston's doing, but it's unique and diverse in a different way. There's some strengths tied to the military medical piece that just don't exist elsewhere, especially in the state of Texas. Obviously, from a Port San Antonio side, we focused heavily on aerospace, advanced manufacturing, autonomous systems, robotics, cybersecurity. It's really about how do we build in our campus on the southwest side of town the infrastructure and really programs. If you hear loud kids cheering, I have 100 kids right outside my office today that are bused down here for STEM programming. And a lot of what we do is how do we convince the parents, the grandparents, that the jobs we're creating here on our campus or up on 1604, 281 or downtown are attainable for those kids. And so I think a lot of it ties into what Sarah does, but less on the corporate side. It's more the person side. How do we communicate for kids across our community that maybe don't think what we're creating in San Antonio is from them? And we would drastically argue against that perception and say, there are career pathways. There are people looking to help you grow here and stay here in San Antonio. And so frankly, I'm pretty bullish on the future in the next decade of our economic development, how we can really fund and funnel more corporate relocations and expansions here because we have talent that we'll put up against any other city in the nation.
And Camilla, I'd like to ask how San Antonio can ensure access to housing and economic opportunity, as we talked about. How can we ensure that those opportunities are accessible and equitable for all San Antonio?
Yes. So at Black Freedom Factory, we recognize the need to redefine professionalism. And this means understanding that the workplace in every context is ever evolving and progressing. So in our Redefining Professionalism series, we invite professionals in the community to share their individual experiences of discrimination, hardship, and triumph in the workplace. I say all that to say that we have to be transparent about the bad things, right? I'm not here to be a Debbie Downer. But while we celebrate the good, we can also learn from the bad. And so this looks like a progressive, innovative conversation that invite Gen Z and millennials really in on their perspective about the future. If we're talking about the future of San Antonio, what does it look like to be Butch in the boardroom? What does it look like to be first gen in the boardroom? A mother, an immigrant. So specifically broadening the scope of that language is, in my opinion, a bare minimal strategy for true approaches to equity and representation. But in just a plain context, I would say checking our privilege. You know, these conversations that include data analyses, right? That include socioeconomic segregation, understanding of the way that we have barriers to vote. All of these things come from a very privileged and educated context. And so understanding that 1 in 4 San Antonians don't have access to broadband internet is where we have to start when we're talking about accessibility and people at the table. Right.
And, you know, Camilla, you were instrumental in activating the Black Lives Matter movement here in San Antonio. And I'm wondering, have you seen improvement in the last couple of years here in the city in terms of access and listening across those boundaries that we perceive? Or do you see change being made? And what can we focus on right now and as we head into the future in terms of getting all people at the table whose voices need to be heard when we talk about the future and future opportunity?
Right. I have a lot to say about this, but I'll try to sum it up. The future of the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Not just in San Antonio, but universally lives in every Black life, lost and still living. as well as every ally who stands in solidarity with the movement. Over the past few years, the term Black Lives Matter has been weaponized and warped in a way that creates distance from the founding principle. And that is that anti-Blackness is rampant. Not only in instances of police brutality, but for example, in sweeping oppressive legislation that disproportionately impacts Black communities, socioeconomic segregation, even the context of immigration, including the Afro-Latinidad. So the future of San Antonio looks like acknowledging those things by doing more than declaring racism a public health crisis on the dais at City Council. It looks like honoring the families in San Antonio, seeking justice for their loved ones who have died at the hands of police brutality, but also uplifting Black organizations and Black businesses who are doing this work 365 days a year, not just when the hashtag is trending or when there is a catastrophe politically. But overall, in my opinion, it looks like the intersection of Afro-Indigenous futures, because we cannot begin to comprehend a future in San Antonio without honoring those that occupied the land before us. And so shout out to the Anawana, the people who protect that practice here.
And, all of these topics, okay, they all seem to intersect in the past couple of years in the public health crisis that we identify as the coronavirus pandemic. And Jordan, part of your work has been in coordinating response to that with STRAC. And in some ways, I think we can say San Antonio has done comparatively well in dealing with the crisis. In other ways, some of our faults have been exposed. And I'm wondering if you can sum up briefly what you feel we've learned from that experience, and how should San Antonio look to prepare for future public health challenges?
So I'll tie into what Will was saying earlier. So first, San Antonio is one of the only places in the United States where we have a civilian DoD partnership like we see here with BAMC and our San Antonio medical system. We have the best regional trauma system in the nation. I'd put money on it. San Antonio is number one, and partly because of these public-private partnerships that we have here in San Antonio. I do think, I'll agree with you, that San Antonio did exceptionally well with the COVID response. The City of San Antonio's Metro Health, coupled with the City of San Antonio Fire Department, led great initiatives for mobile testing, mass vaccination sites. They look at things with an equity lens to make sure that we were targeting the right areas with the right people and the right message. So I think that we did a great job. Now, when we look at zoonotic diseases, diseases that jump from animal populations to human populations, in the past 40 years, there's been 30 different diseases that were only known to be in animal populations that are now in human populations. So this wasn't a once in a lifetime thing. I'm very worried about what the next pandemic will be and whether or not it will have a higher transmissibility, higher lethality than what we saw with COVID. Because COVID had a high transmissibility rate, but in the end, lethality was relatively low. So what can we learn from this one, and how do we apply it to the next one? It's really going to depend on what the next one is. But I'm confident that we have a system in place that we can quickly mend and bend to what we need to respond to the next one based off of the lessons that we learned here. Not to mention, too, I was looking here at the cryon at the bottom. We have amazing organizations like Texas Biomed, who were really leading the front on COVID vaccine and testing. I mean, hell, they've done a lot of work with Ebola, and Ebola's back up right now in West Africa, and they were instrumental in some of the Ebola testing for vaccines. So again, our biomed in San Antonio really leads the way, and I'm hoping we can lean on that in the future.
And Representative Menares, you've obviously worked to deal with the COVID-19 crisis and in Texas. And I'm curious if we can separate the politics of that public health response from the work of STRAC, of the tech sector, in business, and our communities, separating that from the politics of the situation so that we can confront the next public health crisis in a more productive and collective way.
I would hope so. In a perfect world, I would hope that politics would not come into play. But as you saw what happened with this pandemic, it was front and center where there were COVID deniers. It became a situation where based on where you lived. If your elected officials did not believe COVID was real, people died, people were exposed. Money wasn't allotted where it needed to go for healthcare. It wasn't allotted for the education system for all of those students who are falling behind. Unfortunately, it just seems we're in a world where the political fighting and just the politics now is front and center. And so, I feel very fortunate that, in Bexar County, in San Antonio, we had leadership that understood that we needed to come together, because the state was not going to do anything for Bexar County or San Antonio. And so our leadership here understood that we had to take affirmative steps to try to figure out how we get vaccines to the community, acknowledging the fact that, we had an issue with students not being able to access, no broadband to do their homework. And you had so many children in parking lots, and thanks to VIA that could give the hotspots, and thanks to the port that could give the hotspots. We all came together as a community to try to address what we needed to. But, we're going to have to take what we learned as the footprint and continuously visiting those policies. So in the event, if we do have another pandemic, we'll be ready to address it. And so we can look at what were the mistakes made, where were the balls dropped, learn from that and be better. But it's going to take continuously visiting that footprint and making it better. But unfortunately, I just think politics is always going to be involved. And that's what's scary. And that's what people need to understand is you really need to exercise your right to vote and ask your candidates and the incumbents where they stand on these issues. Because again, if you have someone who just did not believe that COVID was a thing, that hurts the population at large in the future if they continue to stay in office.
I think let's turn to Will for some insight here. And I don't mean to make light of the idea of a virus being digital as opposed to physical, but you've done a lot of work with cybersecurity. And I'm seeing a potential intersection here in how we deal with cybersecurity issues, where we have a kind of silent, creeping danger that might emerge and eventually affect a greater part of the community. And we need business, government, and citizens all working together to be alert, be aware, and move productively to solve those crises. Are there any lessons you've learned in your work in cybersecurity that we can apply, even metaphorically, to these kind of social issues that also plague us?
Wow, Nicholas, that is a great question. I think one of San Antonio's strengths, Jordan mentioned it in the life sciences biomedical space, is how we've seen commercialized technology that has changed lives come out of existing public-private partnerships with federal military health system. I think similar in the cybersecurity space, our lineage as a community goes back to the late 1940s, before cybersecurity was a word. But I think it's less about cybersecurity, which is a big word that means nothing and everything all at once. It's about how is that applied to autonomous systems, to robotics. Some of the partnerships we see emerging out of the port is when someone that really knows data analytics or machine learning, but what they really want to talk to is someone that understands the human brain. Because as you think about the future of deep learning, machine learning, there are certain capabilities that just do not exist within current compute power to functionally act like our amazing brain does. So I think to your question, the same partnerships we've seen yield kind of industry changing technology and solutions within security or computer science can absolutely be provided as we think about the future of public health crisis or anything that challenges our city. And I think from a personal opinion, I think San Antonio did an amazing job of collectively coming together. We were just talking about digital divide. I put our city's effort and what they did through the city's innovation department to get access and hotspots to schools and neighborhoods and ensure kids had connectivity up against any other city in the nation. So I think that's where San Antonio often shines. When a tough challenge is put together, it's not just those that are running, daily against the challenge. It's how do we bring in bright minds from across horizontal sectors think creatively and come up with solutions that you might not get in a silo. And I think that has been true of our cybersecurity industry and was definitely true of our response to the pandemic.
And we can see that even in our discussion today, that San Antonio has demonstrated that it can come together despite the complexity and challenges of the issues we face. San Antonio is well known as a sanctuary city. We have the largest Martin Luther King March in the nation. We boast a majority Latino population here, and I'd like to toss this question to Camilla and Sarah to start. How can these particular qualities of our city combine to position San Antonio for the future in politics, in business, and in all sectors? Maybe Camilla, would you like to start with that one?
Yes. So I would definitely say that I'm focused specifically on like broadening the scope of language, such as equity, inclusion, and diversity, and really putting that into praxis by truly diversifying seats at the table beyond race. It's time for the youth to withhold these seats, to become executive directors, to have transgender and non-conforming individuals on city council. It's time for CEOs of criminal reform work to have the individual experience of being formerly incarcerated. Facing stigma head on by embracing the wisdom that comes with the individual identity is a bare minimal strategy, like I said. But I also think that San Antonio is awesome. Like the culture here is a gem. And that's what really draws people to San Antonio, aside from Six Flags and the awesome attractions that we have here. But we have a city of hardworking people and immigrants who make this city amazing. And so, like I said, embracing that and really finding creative ways for accessibility, as well as putting into praxis diversity and inclusion and equity, and not just allowing them to be words that we put on a job application or resume, right? I think that's really the future of what that looks like.
And Sarah, all of those issues where we have things we need to confront as a city, and we have obvious qualities that set us apart and our strengths. Just as Mia mentioned, how do you message that when you sell San Antonio as a city for business, for economic development and opportunity?
Sure. Well, I think, I alluded to it a bit before, being located in the state of Texas with the benefits of being in the state from a corporate perspective is really important. But I think where San Antonio really is leading the pack within the state is that we are a progressive city with an inclusive environment, unlike really any other place in the state. And so when you layer that in and you think about how companies are so focused today on ESG goals and on diversity, equity, and inclusion, well, if they want to walk the walk, where better to do that than right here in San Antonio, where our population lends itself easily to help support them in hiring. And companies are going to follow the talent. So the more people that continue to move here, the better we do at educating and upskilling our people. We'll be able to really help meet the needs of our corporate clients from a hiring perspective, just by the nature of who we are. And so that's how I think about it when I think about how we tell this story.
And can we connect you and Will on this idea of whether, we can use the terminology diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it can be a buzzword in corporate conversations, but when we actually talk about the groundwork necessary to prepare the new generations all across the board for innovations in the tech industry, for opportunities, does San Antonio present, is San Antonio plugged in to that pipeline to be able to give various industries the workforce that they need to really thrive here?
Yeah, that was for me, Nicholas.
I guess I'm envisioning a kind of exchange.
Yeah.
Will, because
Of course, I just wanted to make sure I heard correctly. So, I think that in some ways, yes, we absolutely are doing the right things. I think when you look at the ways that we're leaning in on essay ready to work, some other really massive spins that no other country, no other city in the country, I think is really leaned in this way, is doing that. We are positioning well. That said, we have a big disconnect currently in the readiness of students that are graduating from our institutions, particularly pre-K through 12. They're not ready to go to college. So what are we doing to make sure that when folks are coming out of our education system, that one, they're educated for what these future jobs will look like? I do think probably more than any other place in the country as well, I see a resiliency and a grit here that many places lack. And so I think we just need to give the tools to the communities here, and they'll thrive on their own, which is really remarkable. And I think we have a lot to look forward to in that perspective, but we have to continue investing in our education system, making sure that we're informing on what those skills need to look like for the future. What are the skills that companies need, not just today, but 5-10 years down the road, because it will continue to evolve. And so we have to just be building resilient, a resilient community, resilient population, resilient kids. As a mom, I think about that all the time. Am I giving it too easy to my child? I need to make sure we're building that resiliency in him, because he's going to have to pivot. If I pivot once, twice, 3 times in my career, that's pretty common. But for them, they'll be pivoting 5, 6, 7, 8 times in their career, right? So what are we doing here locally to make sure we're preparing our kids that way? And I think we're making some really positive strides.
And Will, when we talk about attracting talent, developing talent, are we looking locally as well as outside of the city in terms of developing a thriving tech sector?
Absolutely. And I think from the local angle, Nicholas, I mean, I don't think of myself as old, but it's a different type of 13, 17-year-old today than when I was 13 or 17. And something we found is, how do you go meet kids where they're comfortable? And they're comfortable in different medians. They get inspired by different things. We have, I assume many of our listeners today, and I know many of the San Antonio Report team, has been down to the San Antonio Museum of Science and Technology. And it's an amazing facility that's about inspiring kids. It's also adjacent to a land gaming center. I'm sure we got some gamers tuning in today. People ask us all the time throughout the summer, we have parents come in because their kids want to play a video game. So why gaming? Well, that's because there's a huge swath of young talent that is comfortable in that setting. They'd rather be like we are today, remote, talking to their friends, playing a video game. And so we use that as a way to channel that excitement and energy and commitment to becoming a great gamer, to educate kids that those skill sets are immediately transferable to an academic pathway, to a career opportunity. Frankly, every one of our 90 employers on the campus wants to hire gamers. There's a unique mindset that makes a good gamer. And so I think that's one example of how do we go meet kids where they're at. And to Sarah's point, I think absolutely it's this, it is an issue, but one we're all collectively trying to tackle. Like, how do we ensure when kids graduate, both the systems they were operating in, whether traditional or non-traditional, have really given them a skill set and preparation to go deploy and be a hireable candidate. And a lot of times you flip that coin over and say, hey, corporate entities, you've got to be very laser focused on engaging academic providers, not just what you need today, but what you need 7 years from now. It gets back to the old computer science as a language, and how do you normalize it across so that every kid has the same chance to learn computer science and coding as they would Spanish or Latin or German. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of collaboration here. I think Sarah probably does more on the outbound talent recruitment and marketing and kind of branding this very unique community I know we all believe in. But from our standpoint, from Report San Antonio, it's as simple as how do we convince the kid a mile north from here that does not have broadband internet, that does not think they can go get a high-paying cybersecurity or robotics job, that they absolutely can. And here's a very specific pathway to get your education funded, and frankly, create an opportunity that didn't prior, exist. So for us, it's really the ones and twos and tracking how many kids in a small level that scales over time can we create these opportunities for? Because if you change one kid's life, San Antonio and our communities on the east side, west side, south side, it changes a community and a family writ large just by changing one kid's opportunity, creating this upward economic mobility.
And Jordan, thank you for being very active in responding to some questions in the chat. And poverty, I see as an issue that's coming up in there. And earlier we talked about the barbell economy. How do we thicken that barbell so that it's more in proportion to the weights on either side?
That's tough. So I'm not an economist, but I'll tell you that there's 40% of Americans right now would have to borrow or sell assets if they had a unexpected $400 expense. 40% of America would have to sell or borrow for a $400 unexpected expense. So that is a staggering number for me. And again, these are numbers that were pre where we're at today with inflation and rising rents. So how we fix it, I mean, it's going to be education, recruitment, retainment, training. I'm hopeful for SA Ready to Work. I'm hopeful that is a catalyst for change in San Antonio. It's yet to be seen. It's also in its infancy, but I don't know. It's going to take a really targeted investment, especially into certain communities that have been historically overlooked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And speaking of overlooked, we at the San Antonio Report are very curious, and we certainly don't pretend to know everything. So we'd like to ask each of you to name a change maker that we might not be aware of. And this is for the benefit of all of our viewers. Who should we be looking to lead San Antonio into our collective future? Who would like to go first?
I'll take a stab at it.
Good.
So I'll mention one of Port San Antonio's board members, Beto Altamirano. Beto's great, has a local tech startup. I think Michelle Ugalia Holland, who's over at Sage right now, is brilliant. The mayor's office has some great people like Juan Valdez. Hell, my wife is the circular economy and deconstruction manager for the city. She's doing some great things. But we have to ensure that we're getting more seats at the table and we're identifying these people. I know a lot of places tend to push down on those that are rising up, and San Antonio needs to be the converse of that and find these people, identify them, and actually blow out their backs and lift them up. But there's definitely ways to get them involved. I love ADLDP. LSA, Texas Lyceum, SA 2020 has the board game that will help identify your passion and then tie you into a nonprofit board. So I would really encourage that we start identifying more people like this and pointing them in the right direction so that they can be San Antonio's voice.
Wonderful. We can talk a little bit about how to encourage people to become change makers in their fields. But let's jump to, you mentioned a seat at the table, you quoted Solange, so let's jump to Camilla, who has also used the terminology to talk about our future. Who should we be looking toward to lead San Antonio?
So my first answer is any and every youth individual in the city. They really hold the key, or everywhere. The youth are the future, truly, and so far ahead of their times in terms of technological advancement in the era that they're growing up in. But I will name Marilyn Santibanes. She's the director of harm reduction at Corazon Ministries. Something that people don't really know, I think, about Bexar County is that this is the only county in the entire state where clean needle exchange is legal. And this is innovative, right, in making sure that STI transmission levels are lower, but also creating erasing stigma, essentially, for folks who may struggle with substance abuse, but even harm reduction in the context of safer schools, right? We're seeing an era where it's not necessarily very safe for youth to attend schools in terms of shootings that we've seen lately. So harm reduction is definitely the future. throughout the nation. But Marilyn, she really makes sure that individuals have access to that care, making sure that overdoses are documented, that we have that data in the city, and that we also have ways to test for fentanyl, because we're also seeing that take America by storm. So shout out to her and the work that she's doing.
And how do we begin if we're interested in helping out at this ground level? Do we begin as volunteers? Do we talk? Do we go out in the streets and protest as you did? How do we move our desire to help forward to practical solutions?
So Corazon Ministries is a day center where folks can volunteer Monday through Friday to help our unhoused residents get a meal or have a shower. So definitely check into those resources. But I would say, yes, always exhibit your First Amendment freedoms, right? That's what they're there for. But essentially give into that urge. I was devastated and I had no clue where I would end up, only how I would get there when I was using my voice to call the community to advocate and stand in solidarity for basic human rights for George Floyd. But, you know, my answer is that there is no field, there's only fate. And to check more than one box and not allow a single one define you, and to go for that board seat, even if you don't feel like you have the experience, because we all have individual experience and wisdom to offer.
And Kimia mentioned youth, so we'll go to Sarah, you've talked about your 7-year-old, and you're listening to every day. And I'm also curious who you feel we should be paying attention to in economic development or any other topic in your range of concerns.
Yeah, well, I should note, I've really only been here since the end of January, so I'm getting to know the community. This is a little bit of a cop-out, but I'm still getting to know the community, right? But I will say I have the honor and privilege, actually, of working at an organization with 5 women leaders. The Greater SATX team is all women. Which I think is amazing in economic development. That is frankly unheard of. And so, you know, some of the work that my colleagues are doing, Romanita Mata Barrera, for instance, is leading work that we call talent pipeline management, which is working with companies to connect with the educational institutions to make sure that those skills that are being taught are what companies need, so that individuals coming out of the programs can be hired immediately and brought into quality jobs within San Antonio. So that's one example. But I'm also really encouraged by the work that my colleague Brenda Hicks Sorensen, who's the Director of Economic Development at the City of San Antonio, is doing to really change the way that they think about and work in economic development, investing in place-based economic development, making sure that the way that we work with companies, the process is clear and smooth. So I think there's some really exciting things happening in economic development here. And with a little bit of a cop out, I'll leave my names at that.
Well, thank you. You did give us a good name. And Will, you know, that Sarah just touched on a few topics there, including STEM indirectly, and you mentioned that earlier. Are we seeing the full representation in the STEM field that we need to see in your mind? And maybe you can also, you know, tie that into emerging leaders who are ensuring that, you know, we're developing our economy with all San Antonians in mind.
Absolutely. It's you're reading my mind, Nicholas. I was going to say the emerging leaders I think about are these 100 kids that just walked by my office, because they're all probably way more creative and driven than I was at their age. And so we get to see it every day through the Science Museum. And you could pull up their heat map of the 120,000 kids that have come through the last 6 years, and they don't live in one district, they live in every district. They come from all over the community. And so I think through these programs to get STEM education that aligns to careers here, those, you know, the future emerging change makers are really going to come out of those programs. And 10 years from now, they'll think I'm an old guy and they'll be standing on a panel like this and presenting about what they're doing to change our community. I think ultimately, when you say, do we have kind of enough diversity or representation? I think we'd all agree no, and we probably never will. And so collectively, it's our efforts to ensure no kids left behind or prevented from access or the opportunity to engage. We have some, great change makers, I love the term, on our campus. I mean, Stephanie Garcia with the Ports team has launched SATX Robotics. And if you're not tracking the sneaky, cool, nationally recognized robotics scene here, it matters. It matters to what we're talking about, the future of autonomous transportation, micro-mobility. How do you connect disconnected populations, ensure workforces can access place of business? Stephanie's done an amazing job. Plus One Robotics, I think most in San Antonio know him, raised a massive round of funding throughout COVID. A great example of someone that's really putting us on a national reputation within an industry that people don't generally think of San Antonio for. And then I go back to gaming. If you're laughing about me about playing video games, which is what my kids say I do all day long, Sam Elizondo, who started a nonprofit foundation, is our director of esports and gaming down at the Port at our Techport Center and Arena. I really think things like that, thinking differently about how you engage kids, how do you intersect with them, how do you provide them opportunity, take where they're passionate and translate it into careers, are just two names that come to mind. But it's really the thousands of kids that come into the Ports campus and around our community daily. Those are really the future of our change makers in San Antonio.
Right. And Representative Menares, I don't know what politics looks like to younger folks these days, Gen Z and millennials. It seems like there's a lot of conflict. I don't know, what we're looking forward to in Texas, whether we're going to become a purple state politically as we are population-wise. But I'm curious how this ties into your potential future and whether and who you can point us toward to look for leadership in the political side of San Antonio and Texas.
Thank you for the question. So I think about my husband. He was so fortunate to have had Barbara Jordan as a professor at the LBJ school. And we love to talk about, the political shows we see. And he talks about how she would tell the class how the pendulum will always swing at a certain way. That's happening in Texas. It is. We have gone from a very, very red conservative state. We're seeing the changes that are coming in terms of voting. For myself, I don't know what I have next in store. I love policy. Right now, I want to stay engaged. Of course, I'm always going to be concerned about women's health care, voting rights. Right now I'm definitely looking at consulting opportunities. We'll see where I end up, but I will be making some decisions soon. But in terms of an emerging leader for me is Dr. Lisa Ochoa with the SAVE Clinic. She is so dedicated to serving underserved areas. She has her clinic on the South Side. She is a vascular surgeon. She could have easily made a whole lot of money, and she made the conscious decision to set up shop on the South Side because of her concern for the diabetes rate, the number of amputations that many people were having. She cares about educating the public. And so we need to understand that healthcare plays a major part in San Antonio. If we don't have families and people healthy, it affects the community, it affects the economy. And so for me, it's her dedication to educating elected officials, educating the community about the importance of healthcare, access to quality healthcare. And I just think I see her as just possibly taking that knowledge and maybe running for office. Maybe I can convince her to do so one day.
And several of you have mentioned the importance of voting. I just want to say that our editors have been hard at work on an election guide. So as always, the San Antonio Report is working hard to educate our readership and the city on the importance not only of voting, but of learning what the issues are and how we should approach them according to our own beliefs and desires for what we see for our community. So I would like to say we're approaching our hour. Thank you so much all for agreeing to be part of this, for sharing your insights and perspectives. I think we have a lot to look forward to as a city. Is there anyone who has a final comment that they've been just itching to say before we let you guys go?
Yes. Voter registration deadline is October 11th. Please make sure that you're registered to vote. November 8th is election day. Early voting begins, if I am correct, October 16th or 19th, the last week of October. If someone can quote me on that, help me out. But yes, please, deadlines are sneaking up on us. Get out there and vote. Your voice is your everything. It's your autonomy.
And tune into our election guide, and we can hopefully help enlighten our readers to some of the issues that are in play. Thank you again so much for your participation. Representative Menares, Sarah, Will, Jordan, Camilla, and have a great day. Thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate you. We appreciate our readers. And I should point out that this panel and all of our CityFest panels will be available for viewing after CityFest is over on our YouTube channel, and I believe on our San Antonio Report Facebook page. Another special thank you to our 22 presenting sponsors, the City of San Antonio and Bexar County Economic and Community Development. And we also thank our engagement and innovation sponsors for supporting this year's event. A full list of sponsors will appear on this screen in just a moment. And although it's a little bit cloudy out there, it's looking to be a beautiful night in downtown. And we invite all of you to join us at Legacy Park for our festive downtown block party, featuring the launch of our new Live Like a Local section. And it looks like cornhole is on the agenda, so I'm hoping to see you all out there tossing bags. Please join us. That's 6 to 8 p.m. at Legacy Park. It's free and it'll be fun. Thank you for tuning in.